Hey everybody, welcome to episode 33 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back, welcome aboard, whichever it may be. On today's show, we will be speaking to Sheri Watson. She is a set decorator by day who has worked on various TV shows, commercials, and motion pictures. But she is also a musician and a yoga practitioner, and fairly recently she has joined the rock climbing fold. But before all of that, she was a professional ballet dancer. Sheri and I had a very frank discussion about the great parts of being a professional dancer and the downsides. One of the things I like about this episode is that we spend a lot of time delving into the mental and emotional aspects of all these active activities, whether it be ballet, yoga, climbing, or whatever you're interested in. If you are interested in hearing about how all of these things impact you outside of just physically, then this is going to be an episode that you will enjoy. She and I got together earlier this year in Ferndell in Griffith Park and had a very in-depth discussion about her history in ballet, her finding climbing later in life, and all of the various ways that these things can impact your confidence and your self-esteem. So without further ado, Sheri Watson.
Hi, I'm Sheri Watson. I work in set decoration for films, television, and commercials here in Los Angeles, and have a very varied background in everything from being a professional ballet dancer to recording in the music business to shopping for movie sets. One of the things I like to do more than anything right now is to rock climb. And although I've only started about a year and a half ago, it's something I'm very passionate about.
You didn't grow up out here in Los Angeles, did you?
No, I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and lived there till I was 16 when I moved away to accept a scholarship to study with the Stuttgart Ballet School so that I could continue my professional training as a dancer. And moved back to New York when I was 16 and a half to continue the professional training at the Joffrey Ballet School. And ultimately, a couple of years later, was accepted into the American Ballet Theater in New York City.
How did you originally get into ballet? Was it something your parents wanted to do? Was it something you wanted to do? How'd that start out?
I started dancing as a child, and I think every little girl when they were 5 years old got sent to ballet. The thing that was interesting with my story is that when I was 6, I was given a scholarship to study at the local art school. So on Saturday mornings, I went to this art school at the same time that the other little girls were going to the ballet class. It was actually a half-hour ballet and a half-hour tap. And at the end of that year, the teacher was choreographing a dance number for the local camp, the local day camp. And she was holding auditions, and all the other little girls from the class were there auditioning. And even though I was only 6 years old, I remember her looking at me and saying, "Oh, I remember you from last year. You can be in this dance number." And I remember at that young age feeling this need to prove myself because I had not been dancing with them for the last year. And I felt that I needed to prove that I was worthy of being allowed to be in this dance number because I was a year behind the other girls. And when my mother asked me for the next year whether I wanted to choose to go to ballet or choose to go to art school, because they were both at the same time, I made a choice to go to ballet. When it came time for us to go on point, which was about when I was maybe 10, I do also remember in class, halfway through class, the teacher said, okay, everyone can take off their pointe shoes because people's toes were really hurting and bleeding. And there was nothing that was going to have me take off those shoes.
Explain being on point to those few people who won't know what that is, or who are going to realize shortly that they do know what it is as soon as you explain it.
Pointe is what some people call toe shoes. And they're ballet slippers that have a hard part in the front so that you can
it's
actually...
like a block of wood almost,
yeah, it is.
isn't it? Yeah.
But it's actually glue. It's actually really hard glue. And it has a shank, and it's something that you learn to stand up on. However, you have to be... The girls are supposed to be about 12 or 13 before they start. And it requires a tremendous amount of strength. If it's done improperly, it can be very damaging to the child's legs and body.
Right, because you are still growing at that time. I think I told you this. I did ballet for about 2.5 years in college. The female dancers' feet were just always a mess. A lot of people maybe don't realize this, but oftentimes when you're watching a ballerina dance, she is literally balanced on the tips of her toes. Her toes are not bent like the men's. She is on the tips of her toes, on top of whatever shank is inside that shoe for long periods of time, including all of the rehearsal that led up to it. I could definitely see how it would just destroy a girl's feet, legs, if she's not prepared for it, if she hasn't got enough training at that point, if she's not old enough.
Mm-hmm. I think it has to do also with maintaining core strength. So it's not really the stance is actually not originating from the feet, it's originating from the core. So it takes a certain level of strength to be able to go on point. What's different in other cultures, for instance in Russia, they will take little girls and they will audition them to join the ballet school, and they will actually look at their bodies, and they will actually have the mother and father come in so they can have an idea of what that child's going to look like when they grow up. So they are selecting children that they believe will have the right body type when they grow up to be ballerinas. In our country, it's not like that. Any little girl can go to ballet. Sometimes what happens is when girls go into puberty, their bodies really change. And there's issues that happen with that, with some girls getting anorexic because they want to stay skinny, or other girls just feeling like they're chubby. Usually at that time, too, when girls are starting to get interested in boys or going to the football games or cheerleading, is when they make a decision that they're no longer interested in ballet, in pursuing it.
How long did you do ballet professionally?
I left home at 16, and even though that wasn't professional because I was still studying, I got into American Ballet Theatre. I stayed there for a couple of years, and then I was accepted into the National Ballet of Canada. I stayed there for a few years. I choreographed something for them and for a workshop. Then I returned to New York. At that time, I made a decision that I was done.
So had you decided that you just were done with it and you didn't want to do it anymore, or?
You know, it's an interesting question because I just remember the day that I went to class and I still had punches left on cards at 3 different studios, and something happened. I just felt like the drive, which had been so strong and so intense, had been destroyed in so many ways, because there's a real emotional price that I pay, and other dancers perhaps have too. To this day, and many of my friends that I've spoken to, we have our dance dreams, and they're always the same. And in any way, the answer to your question was there was just a moment when I knew that I was done. And perhaps it was younger than most other dancers would choose, but it was just time.
Do you think overall that the experience was positive, or do you think there were enough negative experiences that had you decide that you didn't want to continue doing it? Because there can be so much pressure, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure internal because I'm such a perfectionist, and because I had made a decision about what my body type was like. I had been told when I was 16 by one of the most prominent ballet teachers in New York. He said to me, I'll never forget the words, "No one will ever put you in a tutu with those ugly legs of yours." And it was incredibly painful to hear that. I think that perhaps someone with a different personality would have just said, I don't need this, and walked away. But because of who I am, that became a reason to prove them wrong. However, there was always that belief in me that I was defective, that I was the girl with the ugly legs. So that even though I got into American Ballet Theater and I still could not see myself, and I still, in my mind, was the girl with the defective body. And so there was just a lot of self-esteem issues, a lot of lack of confidence.
For those who have never done ballet, I don't think most people appreciate just how physically demanding it is. Like, just in those few years I did it, I was probably in the best shape of my life. It was the best exercise I'd ever done. I had the most grace and poise and balance and things that I've ever had. And that was just as early 20-something doing it for a short period of time, much less someone who's done it their entire life from childhood. And so there's this juxtaposition, right, of just this amazing physicality in these beautiful choreographed dance routines. But then there's this maybe even more damaging in some ways than Hollywood child actors, where it's just these people, and it can be, I know it's not this way everywhere, where it's just these adults pushing these children in psychologically abusive ways. And I imagine there are those where the situation is less detrimental and perhaps the environment is better. But it is unfortunate that there's just these people that you watch do these beautiful things, and then it's just ugly thing going on behind the scenes often that people don't know about. Is there anything you want to say about that, or would you rather start to talk about the more beneficial aspects of growing up as a dancer? Because so far we have been saying a lot of negative things about it.
For me, there was a moment when I was in my teens, and I remember dancing at the bar, which is not the drinking bar, but the ballet bar.
Bar with 2 R's and an E at the end.
Yes. And I remember having a moment where it felt like I left my body. And I was in a place of such incredible peace and oneness. And I had that experience a number of times. And also at that age, I was living on my own in New York. I lived in a little room in a girl's residence. I remember I'd get a strange feeling come over me, and I didn't quite know, but something would tell me to go over to the desk and pick up a pen. And I wrote these incredible poems that I had no idea what I was writing. And it was talking about being one with nature. And I believe that I had an experience that was the purity of what dance is. And I think in its purest form, I consider myself a dancer. Where it became something else was when the expectation to look a certain way, to look like the other 23 other swans, that's when it becomes destructive. That's when it starts to chip away and pick away at your self-esteem and make you feel less than, or made me feel less than. I think it's changing now, but at that time, at least with American Ballet Theater, there really wasn't a school that was feeding into the company. So in Europe, when you go to a school, they're training you to feed into the ballet company. So there's a certain style that's consistent, a certain body type, a certain look. And with American Ballet Theater, there was a lot of focus on the stars. And the stars were imported from Russia. The people that were in the ballet company were from everywhere. I'm sure there was a certain amount of uniformity, because certainly there would have to be, but it wasn't like there was a American Ballet Theater school that was creating its own style that was feeding into the company. So we were just a bunch of people that were coming from all over the place. And the fact that the girl that was never going to get into a ballet company because of my ugly legs, that I would get into American Ballet Theater, was pretty extraordinary, especially because I had auditioned for 2.5 years for every single company that came through town. And every audition, I would get tapped on the shoulder and told to leave, because we never got past the part of them just looking at my body. Obviously, when I auditioned, and that's a whole nother story about how I managed to wangle my way in there, but I won't get into that now. But clearly, there must have been something about me. And in fact, I was told that Anthony Tudor, who was a very prominent choreographer, had turned to the director of the ballet company, Lucia Chase, and said, "Who is that girl over there?" And I was to eventually, or within a couple days, get selected to be in the company. Clearly, there must have been something about the way I danced. And that, in its purest form, was joy. That was the oneness. That was just love beyond. And I've come to find that now in rock climbing. I've come to find that through yoga. And I think it's unfortunate that it's not something that I was able to maintain on a daily basis as a dancer.
So let's talk about a few of the positive elements, because clearly you wouldn't have pursued it for so long if it was just this horrible thing that beat you down. So what are the things that drew you to it, and did you actually enjoy the performance aspect of it?
The performance aspect of it was fun. Having a schedule, going on tour with American Ballet Theater, we toured the United States, and back then when there was more money, we would spend 6 weeks in Los Angeles, 4 weeks at the Kennedy Center. And being so young and dancing with the principal dancers in the company were the people that they were my idols. And there I was dancing in the same company as them. I also really liked acting. So, for instance, even in Baryshnikov's Nutcracker, when I first joined the company, it was necessary for some reason for some of the girls to be boys, to be soldiers. And they gave us guns and we had to run around. And I remember just really enjoying it, really getting into when Giselle died and we were sad, really feeling like it really happened. So there was definitely an attraction to the performance, putting on makeup and just being part of a story and being part of a group.
If there's someone out there, say, who's listening to this that has children, male, female, either, and they'd like to get into dance, what do you think are some precautions they could take so that they get their child into one of the non-abusive dance companies as opposed to a place where maybe they might get beat down by the organization itself?
Well, this is where it's interesting because I suppose it's important for the audience to understand that my dance career was 35 years ago. That's a long, long time. That's like 2 generations in the ballet world. And a lot has changed. For one thing, dancers are dancing way longer. I mean, there was a dancer in American Ballet Theater, Julie Kent, that just retired, and she was, I believe, 46 or 48, which is, in our time, that was unheard of. They have physical therapy that travels with the companies and exercise therapists that work with them. I don't really think there is a way to find a company where you're going to get treated well, unfortunately. I think it's just par and course for the nature of what the ballet world is about. I also know that if a child wants it, no matter what the parent says, it's not going to stop them. There needs to definitely be focus on nutrition, and that was something that was never discussed with us, and most of us had terrible diets, very unhealthy. And I think it's important that be addressed in a positive way. Again, if a child wants it, nothing's going to stop them. I didn't really have a mentor, so I think having someone that can support the confidence of the child is probably the most important thing. And then there's the fine line of not having them be stage mothers that are going to push them beyond their interest level. I know some of my friends that are teachers, one of the things that they have a lot of trouble dealing with are the stage mothers that call them up and want to know why their daughter didn't get chosen for a certain part, and it just puts a lot of pressure on the situation, and I'm sure it puts a lot of pressure on the child.
Yeah, I would imagine probably the most helpful thing for a parent that wants to be involved is to not be there so much to push the child or push the company, but to just make sure the child is being treated properly and the child is cared for, and in a sense to babysit their child instead of trying to mold a career of their child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And also just if there can possibly be an open communication. I didn't have that. I grew up with 4 brothers and a sister. My parents were not anywhere involved in my career other than they were supportive of me financially. They allowed me to go to Germany. They arranged for me to come and stay in New York. As far as emotional support, it wasn't there. It was really up to me. If a child is wanting to dance, I think it's real important that there's an open communication, so that, because I felt for myself that if there was something really bad going on, like I felt awful about myself or hated myself, there wasn't anyone to talk to about it. I think that had I had that kind of support, had I had someone that could have helped me see the beauty in myself instead of only looking at the ugliness that I felt about myself, I would have had a much more, I don't want to necessarily say successful career, but just a much more satisfying about how I felt about myself. I mean, that kind of gets into psychology.
Right. I mean,
but still.
There's a level, right, of negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. And if you go too far either way, you don't necessarily get optimum results. And if you're primarily getting negative reinforcement, you're really not going to get optimum results because you're just going to beat down the person that you're supposed to be helping build up.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I was doing it, it was 17 years ago, something like that. Granted, I was older. And we were not heading into the competitive world you were going into. The school I went to, as far as I could tell, treated everyone very well. Perhaps someone would tell me otherwise, but from my side, it appeared everyone was treated very well. Our teachers were actually really great. So hopefully there are some out there that are good. And I think we were talking about if parents just stay involved, stand on the sides and watch and observe more than trying to mold it, they will probably be able to tell fairly quickly if what their child is getting into is positive or negative. So from ballet, there's a big time period between ballet and you getting into climbing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened in between there? You mentioned yoga. Did you start getting into other things, outdoors and physical, or did you go somewhere else in life?
And again, I'm almost sad to be coming at it with such a sad way of expressing how my career was, because it was pretty extraordinary. However, for me, I will have to say honestly, when I stopped dancing, I was not able to dance for fun because the expectation for me was to be perfect. So I couldn't just go and take classes and dance for fun. So when I made the decision to stop, I stopped completely. It was freeing in many ways, and I don't know that I really was doing much physical activity, actually, surprisingly. I think I needed the structure of a schedule with rehearsals and so forth, so I kind of let that slip. I did end up in the music business in New York in a couple of different capacities, which included recording. This would have been in the 80s. I had a dance single out. It was in the time era of Madonna, when she was just coming out with her music, and I was involved with people who were recording in the studio and a lot of dance music, but the dance, techno, pop dance music of the 80s. And I also worked for a composer in New York named Harold Wheeler, a prominent composer, arranger, and worked in recording studios. Ultimately, I ended up in California and had literally taken a passion for garage sales and a really good eye.
As in visiting garage sales or as in holding garage sales?
As in visiting garage sales. I always had a knack for being able to find things, and when I was a teenager, I used to go to garage sales in Pennsylvania and then buy things and take them to New York, get on the bus, because it was only a 2-hour bus ride to New York, take them to New York, and I would sell them. I'd buy rhinestone jewelry for $0.25 and sell it in Soho for $6 and feel real stoked about my profit margin. And they'd turn around and sell it for $60. But I always had a really good eye. So I used to go to garage sales a lot. And then when I stopped dancing later, at a certain point, I lived in New Jersey, had a house in New Jersey, and I would get on my bicycle and go to garage sales and come back with stuff hanging out of my backpack. The passion for garage selling and finding things and having a really good eye ultimately led me to a career in set decoration. And I've been working in set decoration for the last 25 years. It took me a while to find the next physical activity, but I did begin to practice yoga when I was in my early 30s. I started by practicing Ashtanga, Mysore, which is a style of yoga Mysore is a city in India, and Ashtanga is a style of yoga that was developed by Pattabhi Jois. And it's a series of postures that are the same. You repeat the same series of postures and then they go in levels. I never got past level 1 because it was a very intense practice. It felt really good to move my body. It felt really good to break into those parts of my bones and muscles and that were now getting tight from not having danced or moved in the previous years. I think the Ashtanga practice was really intense, and perhaps I was maybe not quite turned on by that. I'm not sure why. So ultimately, I moved into various yoga modalities, like there's a Hatha yoga, and eventually I tried Iyengar yoga and what some people call flow. And ultimately, I found Kundalini yoga. And Kundalini yoga was a really good place for me because it's actually more of a spiritual practice. And I took the teacher's training the first year I was studying Kundalini yoga, which was back in 2002, and became certified to teach, although it was not something that I really pursued as a teacher. Kundalini yoga is a science and it's a technology, and it uses 3 aspects. It uses the breath, the asana, which is the posture, and the mantra, which is the sound current. Those 3 things are designed to have an effect on the body, the neurochemistry of the body, and make changes and shifts. And I was really, really into the yoga. It was through that practice that I was able to find that same space that I had found as a dancer when I was young, that took me someplace outside of my body.
It's because since you have a dance background, did you find that you kind of naturally slid into yoga and that it kind of really made sense with you? Or was it actually more difficult because you were used to using your body a very specific way and then suddenly had to shift to using it in a different way?
No, it was very natural, but it was also interesting because when I began practicing Ashtanga yoga, they kept telling me to turn my legs in.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Because even though I didn't do dance for that long, pointing your toes for everything is something that's just ingrained in my head now. And yeah, whenever I've done yoga classes or things like that and you're supposed to flex your foot, it feels so unnatural now.
Yeah, they were always telling me to turn my hips inward, and that felt very strange. Getting to that point where physically you have prowess over your body was what felt the best. And I was able to find that in yoga. Kundalini yoga has, according to the teachings, is a much faster progression of getting to the result. The result, I believe, being that yoga means union, and it's a union of body, mind, and spirit. I was able, through the practice, to get to that space of being beyond my mind, which is that same place I had experienced as a teenager when I was dancing, and I found myself in some other realm of reality. And that was really powerful to me because my mind is what was destructive. My mind is what told me that I was, as a dancer, honestly, I used to tell myself I was ugly and fat and this and that and the other. But when you're in that other space, it's something different.
It's interesting because it's like you found yoga later when what you needed earlier in life was yoga. And if somehow you had had both simultaneously, maybe it would have helped in that capacity.
Totally. And I have other friends that I danced with in American Ballet Theater, and we talk about this, and we've all navigated ourselves into other things after dance, and like anything, hindsight's 20/20. I wish I'd had more knowledge about nutrition. I wish I'd had more knowledge about having more belief in myself, and it would have clearly and definitely allowed me a different experience as a dancer. So moving forward, I found that same thing happened with rock climbing. What was really interesting was the way I got into climbing was I had gone to REI, which is a store, and purchased a membership to the co-op. It's a lifetime membership. When I got home, it was a Friday night, I was looking online just to see what that membership would allow me. And I happened to notice there was a rock climbing class going to be the next day at Stony Point in Los Angeles. And I decided I wanted to go, and I signed up and I went. And I'm there and I'm thinking I'm tough and I'm strong and I'll be the best one in the class because I was a dancer and ha ha ha. Well, we hadn't even gotten onto the rock yet, and I was walking around some boulders to get to where we were going to climb, and I cut my hand. Before we even started, my hand is bleeding, which kind of cut in a little bit into my confidence. And I was trying to hide it, and eventually it was dripping down my hand, and I thought, well, I better ask for a Band-Aid. And when it was my turn to climb, I was literally the worst one there. I also happened to be probably the oldest by about 30 years, but I was the worst one there, and it was really humbling. because I was just so sure. And I also remember they had us stand in a circle before we started and say something about ourselves. And I remember saying, if you tell me I can't, I'll prove you wrong. I'll show you that I can. And I believe that I had this notion that I would be the toughest and the strongest. And I wasn't. And that was hard on me in many ways. And it has been hard on me as a climber for that very reason. My age is something I don't really like to broadcast to other climbers. When I began climbing, I was climbing with people that were anywhere from 25 to 30 or even more years younger than me. And I expected to be able to keep up with them. That was my expectation. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm not sure if we're talking about personalities. Does personality drive a person to do things? And in my case, I got up to the top of the first climb that we did, but it was hard. And we did a second climb. And then we moved around the wall and we went to another area and we were going to do a third climb. At this point, it was much later in the day and people were relaxed. And there was a spot where in climbing we call it the crux, the part that was the hardest. And I noticed everybody was hanging at that spot and really struggling. And when I got to that spot, it was my turn, and I got to that spot, I was stuck. Nobody seemed to be paying much attention to me. I was up there for a long time. And finally, one of the instructors came around the corner and he started yelling at me. Literally yelling. He kept saying, straighten your leg, you're not committed enough, straighten your leg. And I kept trying to straighten my leg and I just kept falling. And I couldn't understand what he meant. And he kept saying, you're not committed enough. And perhaps it was that same voice that pushed me into dance. Here was this person telling me I wasn't committed, that I was not doing it right, and perhaps somebody else would have said, well, I'm out of here, I don't need this. And that was the thing that drove me into it. I was going to prove that I could do this. I find that interesting that happened, that experience happened. Within a couple of days, I joined a climbing gym that's local in Los Angeles called Rockreation that allowed me, it was a month membership on a Groupon, and it gave me unlimited use of the gym and 3 classes. Within a few days after that, I purchased the gear package to allow myself to climb, like harness and shoes, and I started going to meetup groups, and within 2 weeks after that first REI class, I was outdoors climbing, and I did almost all my climbing outdoors, and I just loved it. I would see rock and I would just want to put my hands on it.
It's interesting because I could see where your ballet background could be very helpful in climbing because of just like your body awareness and your balance and core strength and things like that. But there is absolutely an entirely different aspect of it where the mental aspect is very different than I think probably the mental aspect of dance was. And especially now that you've advanced into like traditional climbing and leading and things like that, there is this fear of injury and danger that you have to balance with like your own confidence in your abilities. Do you find that that's a different experience than you had before?
Interestingly enough, I'm not afraid when I'm climbing. I'm not afraid of falling. I'm not really thinking about getting hurt. Now, just to go backwards for a second to talk about dance, I was actually never injured as a dancer. I was injured later in life. I severed my Achilles tendon when I was 41. Ironically, I was dancing when it happened. It was just a trance dance event, and I really wasn't doing much movement, and it just snapped. And I've had 2 meniscus repairs, and I've had a surgery on my large toe, my big toe on my left toe, which was to repair a bone spur. The injuries that I had came later. As far as climbing, I'm not afraid, and I'm not afraid to get hurt, and I'm not afraid to fall. However, sometimes when I start thinking, that's when I get afraid.
So the mental and physical aspect in ballet is one thing, and the mental and physical aspect in climbing is another, and there are definitely overlaps. And I was just curious if you were noticing ways that maybe you were being challenged in a different way than you had been before.
I think that one of the things that I appreciate the most about climbing is my experience has been that when I climb, it's just me and the rock. There's nothing else. my mind can't think about anything else. And it's probably the only experience, except for some moments in yoga, that I'm able to get to that place. And I suppose that as a dancer, when you're in that space where you're dancing, you are also not thinking about anything else. And since I have the kind of mind that goes around and around, in yoga we call it the monkey mind, I cherish that time that I'm able to focus on just what's in front of me and not be thinking about anything else.
What kind of goals have you set for yourself in climbing? Have you set any? Are there any particular things you're trying to attain, or you just want to follow through as far as you can and see how it goes?
The climbing for me has been a progression. It started with the first class, and then as I said, I began to climb in meetup groups. Meetup groups gave me an opportunity to go outdoors and climb with people that I was meeting in. For anyone that doesn't know, meetups or meetup.com, you just find other people that are doing a similar thing of interest. I think that it's just been this progression up. I didn't want to have to rely on other people to be the ones to set up the climbs. I felt the need to participate. So the first thing I did was purchase a rope. So I felt that I was offering something to the group. And then I wanted to be the one that would set up the rope, which meant that I would need to learn to lead. And this was sport climbing where there were bolts. So I took the steps to learn to lead. And then I decided that the next step would be to learn trad climbing or traditional climbing so that I could take it to the next place. That's where I'm at right now, is that I've just begun to do traditional climbing. Now I want to take it to the next space where I can feel confident enough to lead trad climbing.
That is when you will start getting scared.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I was with a friend, and she has a rock climbing school. We were in Joshua Tree, and she said, "Do you want to lead this?" And I thought she was joking because it was a 5'9" climb. And normally when you start climbing, you want to lead something for your first time, a trad lead at like a 5'4" or 5'5". So I thought she was joking. But in that same way as I said, "Sure." And she started putting gear on me, and I realized she wasn't joking. It was a mixed climb of trad to start, and then it moved to, there were some bolts, but they were very run out. I think the climb was called Black Tide. I'm not positive, but I think that's what it was called in Joshua Tree. I began the climb, and she was helping me from the base, which was to be expected. It was my first time leading, and she would say, "I think you should put a piece here." The crack that she saw that she thought I could put a piece in was very shallow. She could not see that from below, and there was nothing that would have fit in there. So I was going to have to traverse about 6 feet to the right. And I started to traverse, and I heard her say to the person down there, "If she falls," and it was only when she said that I actually got paralyzed, because I started to think that I might fall. And that is the most dangerous place to be in as a climber, when you get into your head and you're afraid like that. And yes, I do agree that being in that position where you realize that you have more at risk can make you scared. And so probably, yes, in trad climbing, I will find myself.
Yeah, because the tricky thing is, so you can get all the skills you want, you get all the practice you want, but all routes are different. And so if you get on a route where falling isn't an option because there are ledges everywhere, or there's just features that you're going to hit from a certain height, or there's not really a good place to place protection, then all you can do is push through that. Well, you can bail. You can decide the risk is too high and bail, or you can push through it and make sure you succeed. I don't do that a lot, but every once in a while when I do that, that sensation you get afterwards is fantastic, because it's just like this great sense of accomplishment. But that moment can be terrifying because you know the consequence is higher than the reward at that moment. And I think a lot of people who aren't climbers think that that's what it's like all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's not. I mean, mostly you're weighing the dangers so that they're as minimal as possible.
I also think that people who don't climb probably look at people who climb and think, why are those people doing that? But then I think that way about people who golf. So
it's funny. It seems like every time climbers want to diss on some other activity, it's always golf.
Well, I've felt that way about golf before I started climbing. Definitely climbers are a certain breed. Can see where the personality that I have as a dancer and the way I pushed myself and strove for perfection and was doing something that someone might have said at some point, you won't be able to do that, and I was going to prove that they were wrong. I can see how that definitely set me up for being the kind of person that would climb. I wouldn't say the equation is every dancer would climb because none of my friends do, and so I don't think it's definitive that that would lead to it. So I think it's more about personality.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know that I've ever heard anyone give like an eloquent, maybe you'll be the first person, response to the why do you climb answer. Because when people ask me, it's such an innate drive that I don't know how to describe it. Because I see things that are high and tall, and instinctually I want to be on top of them. I want to make my way up them and be on top of them. I don't understand that. I mean, I do understand, but it's hard to comprehend that other people don't naturally feel that way. That's just my entire life. I see a tree, I want to be on top of that tree. I see a big rock, I want to be on top of that rock. I see a building, I want to be on top of that building. I guess a lot of people just don't have that innate drive. If someone asks, and I'm sure people have asked you why you climb, do you have an answer better than that, or do you know why you do?
I wonder sometimes if it's that moment when that man was yelling at me and was saying, you're not committed enough. He was basically saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you not going up that rock? And I was so frustrated. My hands were bleeding, and they were bleeding all over the rock, but I would not get down. And I told you a story earlier when I was 10 or 12 and I was wearing pointe shoes, and the teacher said that everyone could take them off. My toes hurt so much they were bleeding, but I would not take the shoes off. That's the same person. That's the same thing. Obviously, there was that drove me.
I mean, because that's about the drive to push to do it, but something attracted you to it initially. Do you know what that is? Because no one ever seems to be able to answer that question. Why do you climb?
Well, like I said, I can't say why when I saw online that there was an option for a rock climbing class, why I chose to go, because it never was something that had even crossed my mind. Other than here I'm seeing it and I'm saying, wow, that sounds interesting. I'd like to try that. And I've often wondered if I could go back and find all the people that were in that class that day and see where they are. I would be willing to bet that I may very easily be the only person that ever actually went on, especially to as far as I did. As to why I chose the first time, I can't really answer. As to why I continue, I can answer. And it is what you said about when I climb, something happens to me. It's very humbling. It also allows me an opportunity to stop thinking. And it's just me and the rock. There is something about the challenge. There's something about the adventure. And for me, I feel it in my fingers. Like I'm sitting here, and I guess when they talk about people are DTing or whatever the word is, like they need something. They're addicted to something. It's like I want to put my fingers in the rock. I want to feel what that feels like and go up it. I think it's the combination of being in a position where your life is at stake. You have to sort things out that come up as they come up. You have to be fearless. You have to find ways when you think there isn't a way. And I think all of those things combined is what keeps me climbing.
I think one of the great things about climbing too, and I don't want to go on a tirade about modern society, but I do think sometimes here in the U.S. particularly, we kind of disregard the importance of personal responsibility and kind of focus more on collective responsibility, which is also important, but I think personal responsibility is sometimes neglected. The great thing about climbing is it is going to teach you personal responsibility, or you are going to stop doing it. Like you were saying, it's you and the rock. No one else can help you. I mean, that's to a certain degree not true. People are attached to you with a rope and there are other things, but your progression there, your ability to deal with it, your ability to deal with the emotions, the physical aspect, that's all you. If you're the type of person who struggles with accepting personal responsibility, get into climbing because you're going to learn it.
How did you get started climbing?
It was one of those things. I was always kind of interested in. And I think I've told this on the show before. Like when I grew up in Louisiana, so there's no climbing. I would climb trees, I would climb houses, jump off of apartment buildings, things like that. Lots of climbing trees and houses. But there's nothing tall there that isn't man-made or a tree. I didn't even really know that climbing was a thing that people did. I thought it was a thing that a few select athletes did. And this was also 80s, 90s, so it hadn't attained its popularity it has now. And at some point, I lived out here, and I'd gone through a big breakup, and I decided to reassess my life and find the things that I was interested in and pursue them more. At that point, I guess I was more aware that climbing was a thing people could do, and I decided I was going to try to find climbing lessons. I found an outdoor club, joined that club instead, did a bunch of other things, occasionally did climbing, and then at some point while I was in that club, I decided, oh yeah, I need to do this climbing thing. So, and that was in 2010, and then I took lessons in Joshua Tree, and then I've just kept with it, with occasional breaks to do things like canyoneering and other things on the side, but I've come back to it over the last 6 years and pursued it. I pursued it really heavily first couple years, then kind of got to canyoneering for a little bit, then kind of came back to it last year or so, a little more heavily than I had been. So that was me. I was 32 when I finally came to it, so it was much later than I would have liked to as well. So that's how I got to it. So you and I recently, we were out at Red Rock at the big rendezvous, the big climbing festival that goes on every year out there. And you and I and a couple other people got together and went and climbed a route called Tunnel Vision, which is 6 pitches, like almost 800 feet. And for you, that was your longest and tallest multi-pitch route, right?
Yes.
So you seemed pretty psyched about that experience. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
It was fantastic. I guess this may be the time when I talk just a little bit about the fact that I am an older climber and how that's played out for me. As a dancer, where age is important, it's a very competitive thing. You feel like you're older than someone else. So it's just an issue that I have personally. But climbing with people that are anywhere from 20 to 30 years younger than me puts me in a physically challenging position because I need to keep up, or else I'm not going to be included in the experience because people aren't going to want to drag around somebody that's too slow. So even hiking in was a challenge. I have issues with my body that aren't totally the same, with the meniscus repairs and the severed Achilles and so forth. And I pretty much just put that aside and just go for it. So we hiked in and we did a lot of rock scrambling to get there. And what you probably don't know because you didn't know, but when we started the climb, the way the climbs work is that there was 2 people that went up ahead of us, and then you went up, which left me to come up last, and there was nobody else behind me. And the first move was difficult.
Probably, if not the worst part of or the hardest part of the climb, or the trickiest part of the climb, or whatever you want to consider it, is kind of right at the beginning, because it's basically a bouldering move across this boulder to get onto the top of it. And it's intimidating. And as the leader, it was intimidating because it's hard to protect. And you kind of don't want to protect it because then it introduces rope drag that you'll have to deal with later. And then I did that complicated thing where I protected it, got to the top, protected above, came back down, removed my protection, went back up. But yeah, then you're left alone having to do that boulder problem with no support from below. You've got a rope above you, but it's also kind of pulling you off route a little bit. So I imagine that could be a little frightening as well.
Well, I started to go up the route, which basically was just a move onto the rock, and I needed to traverse to the right. And I just couldn't find anywhere to put my feet to give me the support that I needed to make that move. And I actually fell. And when I say fall, people might think, oh no, she fell. Well, I'm on a protected rope and I'm only 4 feet off the ground. So basically it just meant that I was swinging a little bit.
Right, you slipped, you dropped a few inches, and then you probably swung off of the route.
Right, and I swung to the right. So then I had to exert all this energy to get from the right, there was a little gully in there that I swung into.
And a bunch of bushes.
So I swung into the right, and then I had to get myself back over to the left to start over again. Well, after that happened twice, I was down there, and I literally, what's going through my head is, I can't get on this rock. I can't even get started. And Jason doesn't know what's going on because he's 150 feet up. He can't hear me if I start yelling. And
yeah, I could hear you a little bit, but it was one of those where it's like, what did she say? Did she say this? Oh, it sounded like this. Yeah.
And there was no one on the ground. That all I really needed was someone to just push my butt, and I would have been on the rock. That's all I needed. And I'm looking around.
That's all any of us ever really need. Just a good butt push.
There was no one around, and my head was going, I can't do this. I just can't get on this rock. And then I went to this whole place of they're never going to let me climb with them again. They're going to hate me. What am I supposed to do? I cannot get onto this rock. So that was really hard for me because I was pumping myself out trying to get onto this rock, thinking we have 6 pitches to go and I can't even get on the rock. And they're going to wonder what's taking her so long. So eventually what I did was I didn't start the climb the way I should have. I should have gone up from the left and traversed over. Now I'm in this little gully and I just muscled as hard as I could some way. I don't even know how. I just muscled it up. And once I got past that probably was the hardest part of the entire 800 feet climb for me. And then when I got up to where you were, and there were 2 other people there as well, you're all just having a nice little chat. You're hanging out.
That's the awesome thing about multi-pitch climbing is you climb hard for a bit, and then you get to the top of a pitch, and you got to wait. You got to wait for any groups in front of you. You've got to wait to belay up your person. So it's like climbing, party, unless you're alone, and then you just hang out and maybe get cold while you wait for the next person.
Well, here I was so worried that I was going to take so long that I was going to be banned from ever climbing with you guys again, and you guys are just up there yakking away, and it wouldn't have made any difference if I'd gotten there sooner.
Yeah, it really didn't because there was a bit of a traffic jam.
Right. But once we got up, once I got past that first part, it was amazing. It really was. There were times where there was another time where I think that was actually in that first pitch. I saw a big crack and I thought that I was supposed to go through it, but I realized when I started to get into it that it was not wide enough.
Oh yeah, it was that really tight chimney down on that first pitch. Yeah, I know what you're talking about because I looked at it and I was like, oh, I'm not going in there.
So I started to go in there, and then I got to a point where I realized that it wasn't going to work, that I would get stuck. And meanwhile, I had a backpack that you had rigged up, so all I had to do was unclip my waistband and let it drop, but I'd forgotten that's what I was supposed to do. So I unclipped at the top of my neck. And now I'm holding the backpack, realizing it's not connected to me, and realizing that if I let go of it, I'm going to drop it 100 feet. I'd also just put a sling around my neck or across my body that I had pulled out of the wall. So now I'm in this crack, and I'm trying to get the backpack sorted out so that I don't drop it. And I got stuck, and the sling was choking me, and I'm standing in there.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't choke yourself, and then I just have to pull up a limp body.
I was just in there, and it was one of those moments. I get frustrated really easily in general. One of the things about climbing is there really is not space to do that, because if you're going to do that, it's going to be either really dangerous. You have to calm down and just say, okay, I have a situation. How do I get out of this? So I had to figure out how to get myself unchoked, and I had to figure out how to put the backpack back together so it was still attached to my body. In the meantime, I managed to drop a beaner at that moment.
That's a carabiner.
Oh, carabiner. And I watched that go down.
For those who don't know what that is.
It was brand new. I watched that thing go down. Oh, there it goes, down through the tree. But I found something at that moment, too. In that same space, I found somebody else had dropped a piece of gear that I found. So that was probably another one of those moments where I could very easily have panicked and freaked out, and I just knew that I needed to just take a deep breath and solve it. Climbing up that thing was just really amazing.
It's interesting because it sounds like all your roughest parts happened to your first pitch. It's kind of like your warm-up pitch, and then you move through everything, and then everything was kind of gravy after that.
And though, because I'm always pushing myself, I could sit here and say, well, it wasn't as good as it could have been because I should have led some of it. So I always want to go to the next level and not be the person that somebody is pulling along. Like when someone's leading, they're taking serious responsibility. They're much more in danger, I believe, than the person who's following. Because basically I consider myself as just being on top rope. That's not to say that I couldn't get hurt as well, but I certainly feel pretty protected and not concerned. And actually, the only time I fell was in the first move. I don't think I fell anywhere else on the climb. Going up, the rest of it was just kind of felt easy after that first beginning. But there were times like when I was waiting to go into the tunnel, and I was a little afraid because I wasn't sure what that...
Yeah, so this climb has a pitch. It's the 5th pitch, so at this point you're 600, 500 something feet up. There's a tunnel through the rock. It's basically just a detached flake that you climb behind for, I don't know, 80 feet maybe. And it's like you're going into a cave, and then you come out the other side and get back on the rock.
Right. So I couldn't really see the extent of the tunnel and what that was going to look like, and whether I would find myself again in a situation where I was going through a crack that the backpack wouldn't fit and I'd have to take it off.
Yeah. Also, there was really no intelligent way to protect it, so I climbed through that 70-80 feet tunnel, whatever, placing no protection. I shouldn't really fall, or else I would hurt myself. But it unfortunately also means for the follower, since it is traversing left and up, I couldn't protect it for you either. So if you fell, you would have swung into things. So in a certain way, you definitely weren't just on a top rope at that point. There were consequences for you too.
Yeah, and I know that you had said that there was some rope drag issue, and I know that when you were climbing, there was a part of the rope that seemed like it was caught up on a...
Yeah, it got stuck in a crack, and I definitely know what I would do in the future to avoid that. And which I wish I'd have noticed that was going to be an issue before I climbed above it and got it jammed in that crack.
Well, I kept flicking the rope over a piece that I saw in the tunnel that it looked like it was catching on, but later I realized it was stuck in a crack. So that was kind of an interesting thing, and there really was no way to communicate with you at that space. I didn't feel like I could hear you or would have heard you if... And again, that's the kind of thing where we take a lot for granted. We assume everything's smooth and cool, and fortunately and thankfully and gratefully that climb was like that. But sometimes things happen, and it concerns me. I want to take self-rescue classes. I have learned a little, but I want to know if someone gets hurt, how to help them. I want to know if I get hurt, how to help myself. Things happen. Rocks fall.
Yeah, multi-pitch is definitely a much larger commitment, because once you're a few pitches up, you may be closer to the top than you are to the ground. And right, if something happens, if someone gets hurt, it becomes a situation of how do we get this person to safety? Do we need to get them down the rock, up the rock? You're no longer attached to the ground in any way. So getting to the ground is not necessarily easier than getting to the top.
And actually, when we came down that climb, I actually felt that, to me, that was more dangerous. Coming down the climb, You're
talking about the hike off the descent?
Yeah, we were. Would you call that rock scrambling?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of down climbing and scrambling and hiking.
Yeah, probably because there were instances where I couldn't see my feet. So we were coming over. I would be walking over a boulder, and I can't see my feet to see if I jump. Am I going 4 feet or am I going 2 feet? One time, I fell. I actually fell and landed on my arm. And I could have easily broken my arm in that instance. Things just happen. It didn't happen in that case. And then there's just some kind of, like you said, there's some kind of thrill. There's some kind of adrenaline rush thrill about climbing. There's so many factors to it, because there's the mechanical side, which I don't have good mechanical brain. So I have an artist brain, and I learn things in my body. So when they're teaching me knots, I don't get it. Other people have a very logical brain, and they understand that this goes this way and that goes that way, and it has to do with fulcrums and physics and engineering, electronics. Not electronics, but engineering.
Well, I hope it doesn't have to do with electronics.
For me, I don't get it. I don't get it. And then when I finally get it in my body, then I get it. And it's there. It's like choreography. It's there. It's stuck in my body. It's there. There's a lot of stuff that if I panic and get afraid that I won't remember how to do something. And definitely in multi-pitch, it put a lot more at stake because there was nobody there, because I was the last one. So there was no one behind me to get help. And I had to trust myself, and I had to trust you as the person who was setting things up ahead of me.
That was your first mistake, ever trusting me.
Well, you left right before the tunnel, and I looked at the anchor, and there was a piece of rope that was just sagging. And I looked at it and thought, this doesn't look right. But I certainly wasn't going to touch anything because you were climbing on it. And it's things like that I start to feel a little intimidated, or a little, not intimidated as so much as realizing that I have a lot to learn, and I'm not necessarily comfortable when I don't feel like I know enough to be able to study somebody's anchor or study the way they've placed their pieces, so that I know that I'm safe. Because I think what happens when you start climbing, initially you just automatically assume that everything's safe and you just climb.
Yeah, or you go through the phase where you expect everything to be textbook, and then you realize, oh, rarely are things going to be textbook, because rarely are you going to have the sorts of cracks and things available to you that are exactly like what you see in a textbook.
Mm-hmm. And that was the perfect example. Was we had planned or thought we were going to get done by 6, and that's not what happened. There were people ahead of us. It made a delay. We had to wait, and we were coming down the mountain, and it was starting to get dark, and we didn't actually exit until about 8. I think it was about 8:15 or 8:30 when we finally got back.
When we got back to the cars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the other great things, though, so the last pitch, we ended up breaking it in 2 because our friends that were in front of us had gotten off route a little bit and then decided to stop on this ledge. But it turned out to be nice because it was just this fantastic ledge, maybe 40, 50 feet from the top of the rock, and you could just see out over the entire valley below, and you could see all the way back to where the cars were parked and out to the road and all these things. And I always love moments like that where you can just stop on this ledge and appreciate what you just climbed up.
I wish that I like to do photography. That's something else. I have a lot of artistic passions, and I make little films, and I take really nice photographs, but it's not stuff that I consider to be my profession. And that's one thing I always wish that I could. I feel limited when we're climbing. I can't take a big camera with me, my good camera.
You can, you just might regret it.
Yeah. I've already broken my camera twice hiking while I've been climbing, so, tripping and falling on it. So the other thing about photography with climbing is if you're down below and you're taking pictures, you get the infamous butt shots, and then if you're above, you're just getting somebody's head. So, and that's something I know you took a course to learn some photography, and it's a whole nother thing to rig up and so forth. But I really do like photography. So what you're saying is when you get up to a pitch and you want to take a really good picture, and I just have my iPhone in my pocket, right, which is limiting.
So if there's anyone listening right now, because we'll probably go ahead and start wrapping up now. Mm-hmm. If there's anyone listening who is older and interested in whether it be climbing or some other physically demanding thing, and they're talking themselves out of it right now, what would you say to that person?
I have to consider the kind of person that I am and the physical makeup that I personally have, because I could easily say, oh, go for it. And maybe I have an advantage because I do have muscle knowledge and muscle memory in me that's going to make something like climbing easier. I am 56. I didn't start climbing till I was 55. That to me is really old. And to me, because it just is, and because a lot of the people I climb with are in their 20s or 30s, I would love to just say, hey, go for it. You can do anything you want. And in many ways, I believe that to be true. That's true for myself. I think that there's a lot of people that are older that tend to get complacent, and they don't really do any physical activity. I'm not saying people should rock climb or have to rock climb. I'm saying that if you have the desire to try something new, go for it. Maybe rock climbing is a little extreme to start at that age. I think probably more than anything, it's important to allow yourself to connect with nature. And if that just means going for hikes, going for walks even, just to do something. I find it really sad when I have to pick up something at the mall, and I go to the mall and it's swarming with people, and I'll go on a hike and I don't see anyone. All of that stuff is free. I mean, you can walk and it's free. I would love to be able to say to people, you can do whatever you want. That has worked for me. I believe that's true. I don't know that everybody in the world that's my age would be able to go climb rocks. But if you have the interest or the desire, then go for it.
And Sheri wants everyone to go to the mall fewer times and go to a trail more often. So we'll wrap it up now. Is there anywhere online people can go to keep up with you? Do you have blogs, Instagram accounts, anything like that you'd like to share, websites?
Well, I have a website that's pretty defunct because at one point I had a CD out that was based on the traditions and teachings of Kundalini Yoga. That website is www.Sheri Watson, spelled SheriWatson.com. However, it hasn't been updated in several years, so that's probably not the best way to find me. You can find me on that website, and you can email me through that website. You can also, if you're really interested, you can also on Facebook, you can search me on Facebook. I don't know how many other people have the same name, but Sheri Watson in Los Angeles would be a good way to find me. If you want to look at my credits in film, I'm on IMDb website, which just shows you all of the projects I've worked on in the last 25 years in the film business.
Well, I think that covers everything. And it didn't rain on us, which is awesome.
We're in
it's
Griffith
blue skies.
Park.
Yeah.
In Ferndell and Griffith Park, which is a very special place for me. And considering this is Los Angeles and they have this area where they've made a little creek and trees, it reminds me of being back home in Pennsylvania. And I really like it a lot.
And so now we're going to stop recording and go enjoy the time between the next rain. So thank you for meeting me here and doing this.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's go do something.
Climb on.
I really appreciate all of Sheri's openness and honesty in this episode, and I hope all of you listening did as well. Now is the time to run over to the website, folks. GoGetOutside.com/podcast. Look for episode 33 with Sheri Watson, and there you're going to find photos of her ballet days, photos of her climbing days, photos of her yoga days, and even some pretty cool beach/yoga photos that came from her musical CD that she put together a few years back. And there you will also find numerous links, including links to SheriWatson.com, her Facebook page, her IMDb page. So if you're interested in some of the things that she's worked on in the motion picture industry, you can take a look at it there. And also her YouTube channel, where you'll find a lot of the short films that she works on her own, including one that follows a family of hummingbirds from birth to fledging. So head on over to the website, check out those links. And while you're moving a mouse across a desktop or flicking your finger across your phone or doing whatever you do to access the internet, why don't you go ahead and open your email client and send us a message here at go@butcherbirdstudios.com. Let us know what you think about the show. And if you don't like email, if you don't want to use that, if you prefer to use an even older technology, you can use the phone for its original intended purpose and give us a call, 818-925-0106. That is our voicemail account, and you will be able to leave us a message of 3 minutes. If you have enjoyed this show, if you enjoyed this episode, if you have enjoyed previous episodes, do me a huge favor and head to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever platform you use to listen to this show. Make sure you're subscribed, and then rate and review the show. It is one of the ways you can make sure this show continues to be produced. So, if you have a moment, please take the time to go do that for us. Next time on the show, Kat Carney and Craig Kinsley. They are two really cool people that make one really awesome couple. So come back in a couple of weeks and listen to them talk about outdoor photography, being an Olympic javelin thrower, being canyoneers, and preparing for a year-long road trip where they're going to live out of their Suburban. So come back in 2 weeks, check that out. Kat Carney, Craig Kinsley. See you then.